The wind moves across the Mongolian steppe with nothing to slow it. No forests. No mountains. No mercy. The temperature drops to 40 below zero, then keeps going. Wind chill drives the effective cold past 50 below, and at that point, the numbers stop feeling like numbers. Exposed skin freezes in 90 seconds. Not minutes. Seconds. Metal tools shatter if you strike them wrong. Water thrown into the air turns to ice crystals before it hits the ground. This is not a cold snap. This is a sustained, systematic attempt by the atmosphere to return every living thing to the temperature of the Earth itself. And somewhere in the middle of this frozen plateau, there is a white dome. Smoke rises from its center in a thin, steady column. Inside, a family is asleep. Warm. That contrast is not a miracle. It is not luck. It is the result of 3,000 years of accumulated engineering, biological adaptation, and a philosophy of survival, so precise that it embarrasses most of what modern architecture has managed to produce. The structure is called a ger. You may know it as a yurt, though that word actually refers to the territory, not the shelter itself. And the first thing you need to understand is this: a ger is not a tent. A tent is a temporary concession to bad weather. The ger is a thermodynamic argument, built from wood and wool and fire, and for 3,000 years, against the most hostile winter landscape on the surface of this planet, it has never lost that argument. But before we explain how it works, you need to understand exactly what it is fighting against. The steppe does not kill in one way. It kills in four, and each one has a name. The Mongols named them not as weather events, but as deaths, because that is precisely what they are. The first is Tsagan Zud, the White Death. Heavy snow buries the landscape in layers that can reach waist deep or higher. It isolates the ger completely, cuts off access to pastures, buries water sources, and forces families to dig tunnels just to reach their animals. The snow accumulates on the conical roof faster than it can melt, demanding that someone climb up and clear it every few hours, through the night, in the dark, in wind that steals the breath from your lungs before you can exhale it. A child, 9 or 10 years old, learns this job early, not because the parents are cruel, but because survival on the steppe is not distributed by age. It is distributed. The second is Karzud, the Black Death. This is extreme cold without snow. The sky stays clear, the ground stays bare, and temperatures plunge to 40 below or lower. Without snow to melt, water sources freeze solid. Wells become inaccessible. Livestock cannot paw through iron-hard ground to reach the grass beneath it, and they begin to starve while standing on top of their food. A family watches their herd weaken day by day, knowing that every animal they lose is not just meat. It is wool. It is milk. It is the insulation wrapped around their walls. It is next winter's survival, already dying in front of them. The third is Tumerzud, the Iron Death, and it is the most deceptive of the four. A false spring arrives. Temperatures climb above freezing for a day or two. Snow melts into slush, and the animals move toward it, instinctively relieved. Then the cold crashes back, overnight, without warning, and flash freezes everything into a solid sheet of glass. Ice coats the ground in an impenetrable shell. Horses cannot break through with their hooves. Sheep stand on a mirror of frozen earth, inches above the grass they need to survive, unable to reach it. The herds starve in silence. The ice reflects moonlight so efficiently that radiative cooling accelerates through the night, and the temperature inside the ger can drop faster during an iron zud than during normal deep winter, because the earth itself has become a surface designed to reject heat. The fourth is Kutenzud, the Cold Death. No snow, no ice storm, just temperature, dropping far below historical norms, reaching 50 below zero or colder. At this point, exposed flesh freezes in under 2 minutes. Breath crystallizes in the air before it disperses. Metal tools shatter on impact. The stove burns constantly, consuming fuel at rates that can exhaust a family's entire winter reserves in days. Everyone huddles together under piles of sheepskins, moving as little as possible, because movement burns calories, and calories in a Kuten Zood are as precious as fuel itself. These 4 disasters once struck roughly once per decade, giving herders time to rebuild their herds and restock their reserves between catastrophes. Climate change has collapsed that cycle. Zood events now occur every 2 to 3 years, hitting communities before they have recovered from the last one. The pressure on every part of the traditional survival system, the animals, the stored food, the fuel, the felt, has never been greater. And yet through all 4 of these deaths, across 3,000 years of them, one thing has held. Each disaster tested a different part of the gear. The White Death tested its roof. The Black Death tested its reserves. The Iron Death tested its walls against accelerated heat loss. The Cold Death tested the absolute thermal limit of its felt. And the Ger passed every single one. The question is how a circle of wood and wool was engineered to survive all 4 at once. The answer begins with the shape. A rectangular building presents a flat face to the wind, and the wind accepts that invitation, crashing against the wall, creating high pressure on one side and a dangerous vacuum on the other, generating lift and drag forces capable of tearing a roof from its anchors. The Ger is circular, and that single decision changes the entire physics of the encounter. Aerodynamic testing shows circular structures reduce drag by approximately 30% compared to rectangular ones. Wind does not crash against the Ger. It flows around it. The conical roof channels wind pressure downward rather than allowing it to generate lift, so the harder the wind blows, the more firmly the structure presses into the earth. This is not accident. This is thousands of winters selecting against every design that failed. The walls are made from collapsible lattice sections called cona grids of wooden strips forming diamond-shaped openings through a scissor mechanism. That diamond pattern is not decoration. When snow accumulates on the roof, and weight presses down through dozens of roof poles, the geometry distributes vertical force across the entire structure without concentrating stress at any single point. The wall flexes under load rather than snapping. None of the joints use metal, because at -50 degrees, metal becomes brittle and conducts cold directly into the structure, creating thermal bridges that drain heat wherever metal touches wood. Instead, joints are bound with UDR strips of raw camel hide applied wet. As it dries, it shrinks tighter than any hand-tied knot, but retains elasticity, allowing the frame to absorb the kinetic energy of a blizzard without fracturing. The Ger does not resist the storm rigidly. It moves with it, just enough, and holds. Heavy woven wool ropes called koshlur encircle the top of the lattice wall, converting the roof's outward thrust into compressive hoop stress that tightens everything together. The feedback loop this creates is remarkable. The more weight on the roof, the greater the outward thrust, the tighter the bands clamp the walls. The structure automatically strengthens under the exact conditions that would destroy a lesser design. At the apex sits the tuno, the central wooden ring where all roof poles converge. It is skylight, chimney, and solar clock, simultaneously as the sun moves across the sky. The shaft of light entering through the tuno travels around the interior wall at a predictable rate, turning the entire structure into a timepiece that needs no moving parts and no batteries. The insulation is feltskijim in Mongolian, and felt is not simply thick fabric. Wool fibers are covered in microscopic scales that, under heat, moisture, and sustained mechanical agitation, interlock permanently into a dense, unified mat. Making it on the steppe is a communal process involving the entire extended family. Wool is wetted, rolled around a wooden pole, wrapped in an older piece of felt, called the mother felt, lashed to a rope, and dragged behind a horse across the steppe for miles, sometimes at a gallop, for maximum impact. After hours of dragging, the roll is unbound, re-rolled from a different angle, and dragged again. A single piece of finished felt may travel 10 to 15 kilometers over 2 days before it is complete, emerging as a sheet 4 or 5 centimeters deep, dense enough to hold its shape under sustained compression. But here's what changes how you understand the Ger entirely. Felt does not merely block cold. It generates heat. Wool is hygroscopic. It absorbs moisture from the air. As dry felt walls absorb the humidity produced by sleeping bodies and boiling tea, hydrogen bonds form between water molecules and the wool's amino acids. That reaction is exothermic. It releases energy. 1 kilogram of dry wool can release approximately 100 watts of thermal energy for several hours while absorbing moisture. This means that as the temperature drops at night and humidity inside the gyr rises, the walls are not passively holding warmth. They are chemically generating it in direct response to the conditions that demand it most. The gyr doesn't just resist the cold. Its walls generate heat in response to it. And that distinction between a material that blocks and a material that responds is the difference between a tent and a machine. The structure creates the conditions for survival. But something has to burn at the center of it. And in a landscape with no trees, the Mongols found their fuel in the only abundant energy source. The steppe provides the solar energy their herds had already converted and deposited on the ground beneath their feet. Animal dung is not a primitive substitute for real fuel. It is fuel. Kurag, the compacted mixture of sheep and goat dung cut into blocks and dried, carries an energy density of 14 to 16 megajoules per kilogram, the same range as lignite coal. It burns with slow, smoldering intensity that radiates steady heat for hours, which matters enormously when the night will drop to -50 before dawn. The stove sits at the exact geometric center of the gyr, and that placement is a thermodynamic decision. Heat from a central source strikes the conical roof and rolls down the curved walls, creating convection loops that circulate warm air to every sleeping area around the perimeter. The circular shape eliminates cold corners entirely. The stovepipe extends through the tonneau, and the temperature differential between the combustion chamber at 600 degrees Celsius and the outside air at -50 creates one of the most powerful natural drafts possible without mechanical assistance. If combustion slows, the draft weakens, more cold oxygen enters from below, and combustion accelerates again. The system does not need a thermostat because it is a thermostat. But fire requires fuel, and fuel runs out. Someone must wake every 2 to 3 hours to add dung blocks before the embers cool past the point of easy restart. Letting the fire die is not an inconvenience. It is a crisis. So families develop sleep rotation schedules, and the midnight watch, the coldest, darkest shift, often belongs to the eldest child. Not as punishment, as education. As the first real transfer of responsibility from one generation to the next. The fire is not just heat. It is the family's heartbeat, and learning to keep it beating is how a child becomes someone the steppe can trust. The human body inside the gyr operates as a heating system in its own right. Winter demands ulan, ID, red food, mutton, beef, horse meat, heavy in animal fat, and dense protein. Digesting these macronutrients triggers dietary thermogenesis, generating significant internal heat as a metabolic byproduct. A winter herder consumes 3,000 to 4,000 kilocalories per day, not from abundance, but from necessity. The body stokes its own internal fire to match the one at the center of the gyr, and the two systems work in parallel to hold the interior climate stable. Summer reverses this entirely. Chagan ID, white food, fermented mare's milk, yogurt, dried curds lightening the body when warmth is no longer the primary priority. Clothing extends the system outward. The deal, a long coat secured with a sash wound tightly around the waist, creates a sealed air pocket directly against the heart and lungs, wearable insulation that moves with the body. Winter deals are lined with sheepskin, fur facing inward. Wolf fur caps the hat ruffs because it accumulates frost from exhaled breath more slowly than other furs, keeping the face protected without building an ice mask against the skin. The upturned toe of Mongolian boots explained culturally, as respect for the earth creates an air gap in front of the toes that insulates them from the cold, conducted through metal stirrups during hours in the saddle. Shelter, fuel, diet, clothing, every element calibrated to the same pressure, all of it working together, none of it optional. There is one more dimension to the gyr that no engineering diagram captures. The door of every gyr faces, south described as tradition, as spiritual obligation, as respect for the cardinal directions. All of that is true. But the south-facing orientation also shields the entrance from the fierce north and northwest winds that dominate the steppe winter. And beyond that, it turns the entire structure into a solar instrument. As the sun crosses the sky, the shaft of light entering through the tunnel travels around the interior wall at a rate the family has memorized across generations. Snake hour, 9 to 11, the light strikes the western wall. Horse hour, 11 to 1, the sun reaches zenith. Monkey hour, 3 to 5, the beam moves east. The family reads this moving light the way a navigator reads a compass: milking times, grazing rotations, cooking schedules, all synchronized to the sun inside their own home. The house is the clock. The clock is the house. The interior is also organized to prevent the conflict that months of close confinement will inevitably produce if left unmanaged. The area opposite the door, the Kwamor, is the place of honor, warmest, furthest from the draft, reserved for elders, and the family altar. The west side belongs to the men. The east side belongs to the women. The hearth belongs to the fire spirit, and the rules surrounding it are absolute: no refuse thrown into the flames, no stepping over the stove, no water poured onto the fire. These are spiritual laws. They are also behavioral protocols protecting the one system inside the GER that cannot be allowed to fail. The ritual enforces the engineering. The religion protects the physics. And then there is the feature that defines everything else. A practiced family can dismantle the entire GER in 30 to 60 minutes. The lattice folds. The roof poles bundle. The felt rolls. Everything loads onto 2 or 3 camels. Within 2 hours, the GER stands again somewhere else entirely. This portability is not a compromise. It is the most important engineering decision in the entire design. When pastures fail, when the zood locks the ground in ice, the herder retreats to reserve pastures sometimes hundreds of kilometers away. The GER follows the energy source, rather than forcing the energy source toward a fixed point. We build permanent structures and demand that the land sustain us. The GER moves with the land, asking only what it can offer, and taking nothing it cannot replace. Which is why Ulaanbaatar reveals something painful about genius removed from its original conditions. Mass migration has produced vast GER districts where hundreds of thousands of former herders live in GERs fixed permanently in place. Fixed through a full winter, the soil beneath freezes solid and heat drains continuously into the permafrost. Residents burning raw coal, instead of dung, contribute to some of the worst urban air pollution on the planet. The same felt walls that trap warmth now trap particulates. The same low ventilation that conserves heat now concentrates toxic smoke. Remove the mobility, and the system does not merely underperform. It inverts. The GER did not fail in Ulaanbaatar. The conditions it was built to operate within failed to exist there. And that distinction points toward the deepest truth this structure has to teach. The GER did not fight the steppe. It listened to it. Every decision, the circular shape, the camel hide joints, the felt chemistry, the central fire, the south-facing door, the 30-minute dismantling time, every one was a response to something the environment demanded. Not a conquest of nature, a conversation with it. We live in an era that builds for permanence, and there is value in that. But the world is changing faster than permanent structures can adapt, and the steppe gave us the answer 3 millennia before we knew we would need it. The most resilient system is not the one that refuses to move. It is the one that knows exactly when to. Somewhere on the Mongolian plateau tonight, the temperature will fall past 50 below. The wind will move across the steppe with nothing to slow it. A white dome will sit anchored to the frozen earth, smoke rising from its center in a thin, steady column. Inside, a family will sleep in warmth. 3,000 years later, the answer to the cold is still the same circle. It was always the circle.